August 19 Qatar Airways grounded its entire fleet of Airbus AI aircraft, 21 jets in total, representing a fleet valued at well over $4 billion, not because of a crash, not because of an engine failure, because, according to Qatar's Civil Aviation Authority, the paint on the aircraft was peeling and the carbon fiber composite panels underneath were degrading in ways that Qatar's engineers believed posed a safety risk. Airbus said the aircraft were perfectly safe. Every major aviation regulator in the world, the FAA, EASA, the UK KAA, agreed with Airbus. The degradation Qatar was describing was superficial. The aircraft were airworthy. Qatar disagreed. It grounded them anyway. Then it sued Airbus for $618 million in compensation. Then Airbus, citing breach of their contractual relationship, cancelled Qatar's order for Wusher Airbus Neo aircraft, cancelling an order for planes Qatar had not yet received. As punishment for the dispute over planes Qatar had already received. Then Qatar filed a complaint with the World Trade Organization. Then Airbus and Qatar stopped speaking publicly about the matter entirely for 2 years. The battle between one of the world's wealthiest airlines and the world's second-largest aircraft manufacturer involved grounded fleets, cancelled orders, billion-dollar lawsuits, and an international trade complaint, all over paint. Or at least, that is what everyone on the surface was told it was about. The paint was never really the point. To understand what was actually happening between Qatar Airways and Airbus, you need to understand the relationship that existed before it broke down. Qatar Airways is not just an Airbus customer. It is one of Airbus's most strategically significant customers on Earth. The airline operates one of the most premium, globally connected route networks of any carrier, serving over 150 destinations, with a fleet that is consistently among the youngest and most modern in the industry. When Qatar Airways places an order for aircraft, it is placing an order that will be studied by every other airline that has a similar decision to make. Qatar's imprimatur on an aircraft type, or Qatar's rejection of it, carries disproportionate weight in the industry. The AI Wusher was Airbus's answer to the Boeing C-BOT-C Dreamliner when it entered service in 2015. It was widely acclaimed as one of the most sophisticated commercial aircraft ever built. Qatar was among the launch customers. The airline's CEO, Akbar Al-Baker, had been one of the most vocal advocates for the Wusher program, calling it superior to the 787 in range, cabin comfort, and efficiency. Qatar's Wusher were flying high-profile routes and generating the kind of passenger feedback that any manufacturer would want associated with a new product. The relationship was valuable for both parties. Airbus needed Qatar to be a visible, enthusiastic, shy Wusher operator. Qatar needed Airbus to continue developing and refining an aircraft that was central to its long-haul expansion strategy. Then, the paint started to peel. The specific technical issue involved the lightning strike protection system beneath the Wusher's outer paint layer. The Wusher, like the Boeing C-BOT-C, uses a carbon fiber composite fuselage rather than the traditional aluminum construction. Carbon fiber composites are exceptionally strong and light, but they do not conduct electricity as naturally as aluminum. In a conventional aluminum aircraft, a lightning strike disperses through the fuselage skin harmlessly. In a composite aircraft, you need to incorporate a specific layer of metallic mesh, or foil, beneath the surface to disperse the electrical charge. On the Wusher, this layer sits beneath the paint, adhered to the carbon fiber surface. Qatar's maintenance engineers began noticing that in certain conditions, particularly in the hot, humid, high UV environment of the Gulf region, the paint was separating from this subsurface layer. When the paint peeled, it exposed the lightning protection layer, and in some cases, the degradation extended to the composite surface itself. Qatar's engineers flagged this to Airbus and to Qatar's civil aviation regulator, which grounded the aircraft pending a determination of whether the damage constituted a safety issue. Airbus's position was unambiguous. The degradation was cosmetic. The lightning strike protection remained functional, and the aircraft were airworthy. EASA, the European Union Aviation Safety Agency, reviewed the issue and agreed with Airbus. So did the FAA. So did every other major regulator that examined the matter. The technical consensus among the world's aviation safety authorities was that Qatar's grounded AI Wusha Mouse were safe to fly. Qatar's Civil Aviation Authority reached a different conclusion, and this is where the dispute shifted from a technical disagreement into something more complex. Qatar has consistently positioned itself as an airline that applies higher standards than regulatory minimums require. Al Baker has made this argument explicitly in the context of everything from cabin cleanliness to food quality to safety margins. Qatar does not do what regulators say is acceptable. Qatar does what Qatar decides is appropriate. This is a brand positioning that has served the airline exceptionally well commercially. It is routinely rated among the world's top 3 airlines precisely because of the premium perception it has cultivated. But applying that standard to an airworthiness determination creates a direct conflict with the regulatory system, which is built on the principle that EASA or FAA determinations are final. An airline that grounds EASA-certified aircraft on the grounds that its own standards are higher than EASA's is making a statement that has implications far beyond the specific aircraft grounded. It is asserting the right to override aviation's foundational certification system based on proprietary judgment. The financial consequences for Qatar were substantial, grounding Arshi Awushimiao, over a third of its Ashi Wusha fleet, during a period when travel demand was beginning to recover from COVID-19, meant cancelled routes across multiple long-haul markets, wet-leased replacement aircraft brought in at enormous cost, and widespread passenger disruption across the network. Qatar has not disclosed the full internal cost of the grounding. External analysts estimated it in the hundreds of millions of dollars across the 2-year period before the aircraft were gradually returned to service. Airbus's response, cancelling Qatar's Arshi Neo order in response to Qatar's legal action, was an extraordinary escalation by the world's second-largest aircraft manufacturer, cancelling 50 orders worth approximately $7.8 billion at list price. Is not a routine commercial decision. It is a statement that Airbus was willing to sacrifice a major order rather than allow Qatar's legal arguments to establish a precedent that any airline could ground certified aircraft based on its own safety interpretation and then seek compensation from the manufacturer. For Airbus, the precedent risk was existential. If Qatar's lawsuit succeeded, if a court determined that Airbus owed compensation because an airline's proprietary safety judgment overrode regulatory certification, the implications for the entire certification framework would be severe. Every airline in the world that subsequently found any cosmetic or superficial degradation in any aircraft would have legal grounds to ground and claim. The liability would be unlimited and uninsurable. The litigation ran through English courts for nearly 2 years before both parties ultimately reached a confidential settlement in 2024. The terms were not disclosed. Qatar's IA Wusha Mouse returned to service. The AI Arshi Neo orders were reinstated, though on a modified timeline. Both companies issued statements describing the resolution as amicable. Qatar Airways did not destroy $500 million worth of operating capacity because of paint. Qatar grounded its aircraft because doing so was the most powerful form of commercial leverage available against a supplier relationship that had, in Qatar's view, not met the standards the airline had paid for. The lawsuit was not about recovering the cost of repairs. It was about forcing Airbus to acknowledge that a premium customer's quality expectations had not been met, and establishing that those expectations have enforceable commercial value. The technical dispute at the center of the case was genuinely complex, and its complexity was part of why it lasted so long. The degradation that Qatar's engineers identified, specifically a separation between the surface paint layer and the substrate of lightning strike protection mesh embedded in the carbon fiber composite fuselage, was a real and physically measurable phenomenon under laboratory conditions. The question was whether it represented a safety risk or a cosmetic problem. Airbus's position, supported by regulatory testing, was that the degradation did not penetrate to a depth or extent that compromised the structural integrity of the aircraft or the functionality of the lightning protection system. Qatar's position, developed by its own engineering team and supported by its QCAA, was that the regulatory tests were insufficient to evaluate long-term effects under the specific operating conditions of Qatar's routes, which include exceptionally high humidity and UV exposure in the Gulf region, combined with the thermal cycling of long-haul operations in cold upper atmosphere conditions. Both positions had technical merit. Aviation disputes of this kind often involve genuine, interpretive disagreement between expert communities rather than a clear right answer. What transformed a technical dispute into a billion-dollar legal battle was the speed at which each party escalated. Airbus's decision to cancel the AIRCE NEO orders representing approximately $6.3 billion at list prices for 50 aircraft, was itself an extraordinary escalation, reflecting how seriously Airbus took the precedent risk. If Qatar's legal argument succeeded, it would not just be an expensive loss in a single dispute. It would rewrite the legal basis on which aircraft certification authority is distributed between manufacturers and operators across the global aviation sector. Whether that argument was correct, whether Qatar's engineers had identified a genuine safety gap that the regulatory system missed, or whether Qatar was deploying safety language to win a commercial dispute, is a question that the settlement deliberately left unanswered. The settlement's confidential nature is itself revealing. Neither party had an interest in a public verdict. A public court ruling in Airbus's favor would have established that an airline's safety judgment can be overridden by a manufacturer's certification, a precedent that would have weakened every premium carrier's ability to negotiate quality standards with aircraft makers. A public court ruling in Qatar's favor would have established that airlines can unilaterally ground certificated aircraft and demand compensation based on in-house engineering assessments that contradict regulatory findings, a precedent that would have made aircraft certification economically uninsurable. A confidential settlement in which both parties received something and neither received everything was the outcome that best served both parties' long-term interests in the industry's continued functioning. The fact that it also left the central technical question unresolved was, from both parties' perspectives, a feature rather than a bug. What is not in question is the strategic intelligence of the move. Qatar Airways reminded Airbus, the regulatory community, and the entire aviation industry of something important. In a relationship between a manufacturer that needs premium customers and a premium customer that has alternatives, the power does not always sit where the airworthiness certificate says it does.